book. Welcome to Straight Talk. I'm your host, Trishs Wright, and I'm without my lovely, awesome co-host, Scott, tonight, but I am with a group of really beautiful humans here to talk about deshamifying sex. And I would love to just, go around the room and introduce Rachel, Dawn, and Callista as a dynamic group of people really showing up here. So I'd love to start off with Rachel, if that's okay. May we start off with you? And just invite the room to share, what is deshamifying sex mean to you?
Thank you, Trish. I am so excited about this topic because it's been a really long personal journey for me of deshamifying sex for myself. What it means is deshamifying my body, not feeling shame about my genitals, not feeling shame about how I look naked. That's a big part of the journey, and really being able to be in my body and feel pleasure and not be always thinking about how I'm being perceived. I'm heterosexual, so I'll speak in heterosexual terms and about men because I have sex with men, and not be always thinking about how I'm being perceived, and really being able to feel pleasure at a deeper level. And that's how it started out for me. And then once I got into it and started actually deshamifying myself and my sexuality, I realized that sexual energy is so core to who we are as human beings that once I started doing that and having more power in myself and my body and my sexuality, that bled into every other part of my life. Because as it turns out, as I said, it's a core part of who I am. And I felt so much more power in the rest of my life once I started, and I'm still very much on the journey of deshamifying my sexuality. Thanks for listening. And so I invite Trish or Callista or Dawn to talk next about what deshamifying sex means to you.
I'll jump in.
Yeah, generally as host, I'll wait to kind of wrap up my own conversation and give everyone else the spotlight.
So. Okay, wonderful. So hi, everybody. I'm Dawn Light, and I love this topic so much. It has, transformed my own life because I've always been a very sexually, energetic person, right? And I've been married to the same person now for, this year will be 18 years, and we've had an amazing sex life. But I found that there were times where we weren't able to connect as deeply, and it really came down to, this part of deshamifying sex, right? Is like, there's times in my past, in my younger years, where I had really not amazing things happen, and he too. And it came down to where we both discovered that by being really honest and vulnerable with one another and sharing all the things that have ever occurred, and really laying down the need to withhold from one another information where we were afraid the other would judge us about things that had happened, that was holding us back from a deeper layer of intimacy in our own marriage, right? And there's where the shame was, holding our own sense of shame by being judged in the past, or what, the perception of others, right? Just as what Rachel said, that same sense of perceived, judgment, right? Where we're actually internalizing as our own judgment, or something someone said, right, around our body. Like, I had so much shame as a young girl because my breast didn't develop until I was older, right? Because that's just how my body was. And I had boys tease me at in grade school around it. And I think that prolonged my breast even, developing till later, because of the shame and the stigma and all the things that came along with that. It took me years to get over it, honestly. And so it kind of cultivated this like deeper sense of shaming my body, right, as a woman. And I think we're ingrained in our society to experience this as a woman. it's like, you're not a woman unless you're like stick figure thin, because that's all the magazines show. And it's like, no, that is absolutely not reality. And all shapes and sizes of women are beautiful. Like, women are beautiful. And like, we have to really embody that and know that in ourselves, right? And even as I age now, I'm learning to love my body at this age of where I'm at right now. And honestly, I had a huge healing piece come forward for me. And I know that Rachel wants to share a bit around this too, and we'll keep the conversation juicy and going. But for me, as a young child, I experienced abuse from my father, not sexually, thank God, but psychologically. Like, I was always told that I was, anytime I went out and played in the yard and got dirty, it was like something around being dirty. So it ended up transferring to my experiences in sex as I aged, later in life, 15 on, that I experienced this shameful, deep piece inside of me, judging myself as sex was dirty and wrong. And so it always kept me from really deeply, feeling at home in my body, and really judging myself on some level. And so I've just been unraveling all of that. And thank God I have a really loving husband who's amazing and caring and deeply, just there for me on every level, and wants to like go to the next level of intimacy always. And so we've just been able to deepen our intimacy over the last few weeks. Even our marriage just skyrocketed because we just were able to peel away these layers of where he's held shame from things that happened in his history, and I've held shame, and we were able to just hold each other and love one another and accept one another for what had occurred. And like, we don't have to carry that forward. And I noticed that it was blocking our root chakra, even our body, like our chakras felt different, and we felt lighter in our connection after that conversation. And we noticed like, wow, this is really connected to like deep intimacy and also thriving in life. Because our sexual, think about it, we come here as humans, we're created in the lovemaking act. So our sexual force creates so much for our life. It's the lifeblood. It's the juice of our creativity, our everything, right? It comes from that. And if it's stifled through shame or wronging or judgment, then what are we doing to our life force? So I really do feel like this was rooted in an understanding of like, oh, wow, here's why we had complications of being really solid in our marriage and our foundation financially. We were never not solid in all the other places. Like spiritually, we've always been aligned, but we had a long, hard road of being solid financially. We'd have crazy things occur and then wonder what is going on? What is this about? Now, I know for me, I can speak for me, I can't speak for him, but I can speak for me. It was deeply rooted in wounding from my childhood that I had to resurface all those patterns. So everything has a reason. And, when big things occur in our life, it's most of the time like a occurrence from a past recurring now, so that we can really meet those old feelings and understand it. So that's kind of been my journey of what I've been on, and like where I, fully step into fully loving my body and loving myself no matter where I'm at whatever age I am, right? That I can experience real pleasure now and have it and allow it. And that's so important.
And I really felt that I'm feeling so vibrantly, and it is really interesting that place of the sex and money piece, like how tied to that it can be. I'm wondering if you'd like to share this stuff.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much, Trish, for having me, and thank you for Rachel and Dawn for your awesome, amazing, lovely shares. I can definitely hear there's just a lot of conversations that I feel are going to be happening tonight that are really timely, and it's really exciting to hear that coming through. So what is de-shamifying sex? Oh my gosh. I mean, how far and how circuitous a route that has felt like in my story. I think about when I first heard I think it was my next door neighbor. I think I was 8 or 9 years old, who told me, what is sex? And I think about that explanation that I got as a child versus what I think about it now, and they couldn't be possibly more different. So, and realizing that all of these stories are just really, it's subtle the way that these. So I think that that message is that sex is very confined. It happens in one discrete area, in one discrete time of our lives, and yet it's connected to how we're valued in relationships, our capacity for love, our worthiness of love. Social status in different groups might value relationship status and like other kinds of, so I mean, there's just, I think growing up and just being conscious of lots of different performances that all of us are constantly just subconsciously, you know, and consciously as well, just trading in symbols and signs and signifiers, how we relate to one another, whether we're squaring our shoulders and facing somebody head on, whether we have more of a diagonal, like all of these things become kind of gendered and they become related to sexuality. And it's, so I think kind of de-shamifying sex for me has been, well, first understanding where I am now, like what is my position with other people? How have I been trained to be kind of trading in all these cues? Like what kinds of personalities make me feel like I need to kind of be almost, it's like ghosts of patriarchy, right? And what kinds of personalities are going to inspire some part of me that I don't like on whatever angle of that relationship that I might end up being, whether I'm the one who's externalizing shame or whether I'm internalizing shame and like inviting that space upon myself. So I think for me, a lot of, I mean, that's where the journey kind of is beginning, is understanding my own positionality, where I am with respect to other people and with respect to our society on lots of these different systemic kinds of overlapping issues, such as race and ability, class, gender, sexuality, all of these different things. Seeing how those things also evolved as I come to understand my position. My understanding of those things evolves, and so in a sense, a lot of de-shamifying sex feels like it's a journey back to kind of a base. I don't know where I'm trying to figure out kind of what my sexuality was like when I was like a late teenager, because I think that that's kind of the time when, like, I don't know, that's when I was like externalizing a lot of stuff. So I feel like I've got where I am kind of now, and I'm realizing that it's a lot of cycles that are playing out over and over again. So now I'm like trying, now that I know where I'm from, what was I doing? Why was I doing that then? How was my relationship with my father? Gosh, like there's a Pandora's box that could take a whole panel right there. Talk about how our relationships with our parental figures might have influenced our expressions of our self-worth and our relationships with our own bodies. We mentioned trauma being held in the body, and I think that my personal practice of yoga and dance has been a big part of kind of understanding also some of those more subtle cues. So I'm someone who's socialized male, so a lot of that, there's moments when, you know, there's triggers where it might lead feelings in my, like, tightness in my shoulders that leads to like feelings of sensations of rigidity in my hands, whether I clench fists. It can feel like burning sensations in my eyes or in my thoughts. So kind of now I'm noticing when my eyes are feeling such a way, what are my ears doing? When my hands are feeling such a way, how are my shoulders squaring off and becoming oppositional? So it's a lot of reconfiguring right now and trying to figure out how I got here to kind of uncover where I'm going. And sometimes, you know, that involves a lot of blurring lines between what kinds, like what I'm going to label as being sexually active and not, what I'm going to label as being a legitimate sexual relationship or not. So that's kind of where I'm going, because I'm realizing how many messages I was given that are just that don't work with my body or with my relationships, how they become so easily transactional. And I'm about deprogramming myself from those things. So thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. And I love what you're bringing up is really questioning the assigned gender and sexuality roles that were put in, like, in place. Like, and that's oh, I'm so glad you brought it up, because that's exactly where I'm at in some capacity as well. Is I'm just really touched by all of your lovely vulnerable shares. I'm gonna cry. For me, de-shamifying sex started when I was really young, and my parents are divorced. I'm speaking of parental stuff. My parents are divorced, and my dad, my father, and my stepmother were very square. I was 16 when we were all watching as a family, me, myself, and Irene, and he, like, in the show, he wiggles this dildo, and they laughed. My father laughed, and I was, oh, my parents have sex. Like, I had no idea that they were intimate at all. Like, at that moment, I was like, oh my God, they do the thing, because they had never said anything to us about it. Now, so there was that piece. I didn't live with them. My primary relationships, my primary caregivers, my mom and my stepfather were, God, they were swingers, bisexual probably. My parents are not going to say this, but if they are, I love you. I'm so sorry. Should probably asked. But they were really open. I remember peeking around the corner and watching Dr. Ruth. Like, my mom's watching Dr. Ruth, and I'm like peeking around the corner, and my mom would be like, well, why don't you just come over? Why don't you come over and watch with me? And they were very, very open about just like, this is a part of life. Let's talk about it. You know, they passed anatomy books. They would just be like, we're just going to leave this here if you have any questions, you know. And it was a really interesting place for me to be, like, a 16-year-old girl. Like, I don't know what to do with all of this information. And they would sit down with me, and they were like, all right, Trish, we know you're sexually active. You've had this boyfriend for so long. Do you orgasm regularly? I didn't know what to do with those conversations. I was so socially conditioned to think that that was inappropriate to talk about. And I feel so grateful to have parents who, you know, were definitely on a very different spectrum of relationship, and also very open about it. Because what that gave me is choice. That the education that they offered me in the realm of sexuality was choice, like understanding and choice to make my own clear decisions. And that's what they were really pushing for, is educating me to be really in my body and really honest about what's going on. What we talked about, it was terrifying. My parents now, they don't know that they set me up to be a sex coach. Thank you. Right. And so for me, de-shamifying sex is really about the embodiment of what is in your fuck yes, what is in your aliveness, what is truly turning you on. You know, like, that's what's alive in you. Like, whether you're into tantra or vanilla or BDSM or whatever, and like whatever it is that you like that's the place of, like, really accepting and owning yourself for your enjoyments, and being able to hold that and be with other people who can hold that with you. Acceptance is part of de-shamifying. And I'd love to invite any of our viewers or the people in the attendees in our room to type out some questions or some comments or some experiences that you've had with your own de-shamifying sex, or any, like, shameful experiences that you were taught as a child or as a young adult. And I love that this particular group of people here have looked around like shine the light on shame for a long time. I would love to hear a little bit about, Rachel, I know that you have is it a podcast or is it?
It's a blog.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, so my own journey into de-shamifying sex started with this book, which I came across in 2016 on the internet. And this Canadian researcher in 1972 interviewed a bunch of women about their orgasms. And it was the first time I had read kind of real women, first person, talking about all the things that actually happen in sex. Not the movie version, not the porn version, not the version in my mind, but other women talking about sex. And I was blown away, both by how similar we all are and how different we all are. It did so much to sort of loosen up my own sense of self and sexuality that I wanted to do this, that I did a project called This Is Real Sex, in which I've interviewed 45, started with women and then also included men, in depth about their entire sexual histories. So moving beyond the orgasm, interviews anywhere from 2 to 8 hours, starting in childhood. What is your earliest experience of sex and sexual feeling as a child? Because they're there, and sexuality starts, early for some people, all the way to the present. And or putting out the excerpts from those interviews, because to me, it's so powerful to hear about people's experiences, good, bad, amazing, ugly, in their own words, and to just connect as human beings over this very powerful, elemental part of being human. So This Is Real Sex. It's on Medium. And as I said, I started out doing this for women. And then as I got further into my own exploration, I realized how much sexual shame and dysfunction men have, and how silent they are about it. And so I realized we need to heal men too. That's when I started interviewing men. So.
Can you say the name of the book? We do have some people who have cited.
Oh, yes. It's called Orgasms by A.S.A. Harrison.
Awesome.
Awesome 70s artwork. Yeah. And so my version of it is This Is Real Sex on Medium. And what I did was expand it beyond orgasms, and also really tried to bring in a lot more diversity into, the experience of sex.
Beautiful.
Does anyone want to move into that? Because I have things that I'd love to share.
Jump in.
What I would love to just drop into the world is that sex has no necessarily binary. Sex is not it's a personal experience of someone's enjoyment. And if you can find that place in your body, even just right now as you're watching this, like find that place of the arousal, the place that lights your whatever you may have on fire, that place that gets your blood pumping. And who knows, it could be, it could be someone, tickling your ear or pinching your butt, or it could be something heavier. And in my experiences in both the Tantra realm and in the BDSM realm, what I find is that the vast expression of sexuality can be so vibrant if someone is just brave enough to say, I like this. And to be able to share with another confidant. I mean, Dawn gets a lot of the things. Like this lady here's all of my everything. For Misha who's watching, yeah, sorry. There's so much juice in sharing some stories, right? That and sharing the places that really enliven us, that it can often inspire, right?
Definitely.
So I'd love to just like take it in a place of into this like an experience. Like, can you share an experience of vibrancy around your own sexuality, or something like an aha moment that you had? I'd love to hear something like that. You gonna raise your hand?
Go for it.
So I think one of the things that I have always struggled with, and that we women struggle with, is shame around our genitals. Pussy, vagina, genitals, whatever you want to call it. We don't even know what to call it sometimes. We're like, and that started from a young age. I mean, we have commercials telling us that our genitals are dirty and need to be cleaned up. And so all my life, I have felt a lot of shame around that body part. So much so that, like, when very well-meaning partners, men would try to go down on me, and I'd be like, okay. And then after a few seconds, I'd be like, okay, that's good. Come on back up here. I felt ashamed. I didn't feel like I deserved that pleasure. Like, why would they ever want to do that? So much shame. And so for me, that's been a personal, like, just beginning to understand where that shame comes from, that it's not actually true. And that for me has been a big part of de-shamifying sex, is de-shamifying my genitals. And another key part of that is finding men who have not internalized that themselves, finding men who help me heal by loving my genitals as much as, and ideally more than, I do, and say, oh my God, it looks great, it smells great, it tastes great, I want to be down there all the time. And that is so healing. So, choice of doing my own work and then finding men who have done the work or not internalized the misogyny, that's been really important for me and continues to be.
That's such a good point. I think that we're often taught to really shame our genitals, and it really, like, there's so much about sex that's tactile, that's about the smell of your partner's body, your person's body, or their breath, or the touch of their skin, or, I mean, it's just really interesting the way that we've, like, oh, you're supposed, like, labiaplasty, like, people actually cut their like labia minora to make it look like porn, and I'm like, why? I mean, there's just like
Whoa.
these, I know I'm sorry,
It exists.
there's some crazy things in the world, and I can see where people who are transitioning, who want labia, like, I love that, but the idea of cutting it to make it look like something that you're not is really, like, there's something tragic in our society, right? In our
Well, it's like
society, to shame our body.
cutting off a body part because you can't accept it.
Yeah.
Like,
how can we
why
really,
can't we have acceptance for all parts of ourselves?
yes.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I mean, I carried shame as a young girl because I remember, like, very young, when girls are young, you hang out together in little groups. Like, well, this is what happened with me as a child. My mom was like, yeah, bring all the girls over. So I always had little girls at my house as a young one, like age 6, 7, 8, around that age gap. And, we would do the normal thing, like go take baths together, right? That is a normal thing as a little girl. In my reality as a child, that's what happened. And I remember this one time, like, the other girls just kind of pointed at my vagina and, like, made fun of me and made fun of my vagina. And I was like, from then on out, I felt insecure about my vagina. And that carried over into, how I related in sex. As I started having sex later on in life, I was very insecure, insecure about my breast and my vagina, really. And at the end of the day, like, I'm so thankful, I married a man that, like, just deeply loves me and I deeply love him. I married my soulmate. And like you, Rachel, you know, having a man in your life that just loves the way you taste, look, smell, all of the things, like no matter what, hands down, unconditionally loves me and like loves being there, you know what I mean? And just like full on is a ritual for him. And it just allows me to even, you know, open even further. And even in our conversations lately in our sex life, I found that I was able to kind of realize where I was holding myself back in my own orgasms, because I felt, because sometimes it can take longer, I was judging myself for that and wanting him to stop and like, okay, let's do other things. You know what I mean? And so he was like, no, that's okay. I give you full permission, however long, like, don't do that to yourself. And in that letting go, it was like so good because I'm able to just even allow myself even more pleasure, right? And this is like the most amazing thing, that even after this many years in marriage, there's still more growth and still more available to get to know each other even further and have a better sex life. And that's incredible, right? Like, that's because we want it. We both are striving for it, and we're both striving for elevating our consciousness and elevating ourselves and elevating our life. And so that's just the level of commitment we both hold in our marriage. And I personally hold that to myself in my own life. And so I've married someone that has the same values.
Yeah, where do we get this idea that our orgasms are supposed to be fast? Are we comparing ourselves to men? Yeah.
Maybe so. Maybe so, because it's some, you know, and the thing about a woman's orgasm is like, it's rolling, right? Maybe it takes a long time to get to that one. And then once you have one, it kind of it's like kind of a rolling, continuing thing. So that's what I experience as in mine. And so, yeah, it was just like letting go of that mental block of like, this is taking too long.
Yeah, for me, the message is I'm being a burden. I'm being selfish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Like, yep.
I'd also really love to just bring in this piece of like bringing it back to how we shame ourselves and each other around our genitals, like this size queen, like we shame men for like their penis sizes, and it's just so like I'm so curious how that even started and why, you know. I'd love to hear from Callista about an experience or around sexual shame or something that really like your empowerment around.
Yeah, you asked a question I was interested in before. You talked about Rachel mentioned something about getting started, and also like on this journey of questioning these things. And I think that I was thinking about this question, and definitely one of the lessons that I had to do a lot of work to unpack was that, well, I think I can't, that really like sex was just one thing. I think what really started my kind of thinking about it differently was a totally circuitous route. It was just kind of I was doing work. I was like I was getting my behaviorist technician thing. And I was like reading as an academic about BDSM, and I was hearing about all these like submissive things. And I was like, I wonder if like this is like if I can like biohack my brain and like, you know, get myself to clean my room or something. I mean, I was someone who I very much felt like it was like a biological chore, orgasm, for a lot of my teenage years, late teenage years. It was like something I wanted to do as little as possible. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons for that. My family was very Catholic and very, not that all Catholics are like this, but my very much leveraged sexual shame as like kind of a almost behavior intervention route. Okay, so it's like treating me as gross to get me to do things. So so kind of the way that, so when I'm studying as a behavior, so I'm having these experiences where it's just like, oh my gosh, I have like these gross urges, and it's like now I have to do this thing and whatever. Anyway, I identified as I just wanted to like make my partners feel good. It wasn't about me. I didn't want to do any of that stuff. I just didn't want any of the spotlight on me. And then I started like having experiences where it's just like, okay, I'm gonna give this away. I'm gonna like treat it as something that I'm going to leverage over myself, and I'm only going to do it is I'm gonna just imagine. What I started doing is I started being with myself while I'm imagining visions of my own success and my achieving my own goals. And that was kind of like my baby steps into thinking how I'm conceptualizing sexuality. It's a very like, now, I mean, I'm talking about embodied practice and connection and using much deeper kinds of icon. But at the beginning, it was just, oh my gosh, like I'm missing my deadlines. How, like, is my sexuality something that can help me? And like, if I create some structure around it, and it did. So that led to more kinds of, deeper kinds of spiritual work and deeper kinds of how am I going to like, can I, instead of feeling dissociated when I'm connected to sexuality and like intellectualizing it and thinking of it as something that's like separate from me, something that's going off, how can I just like, a lot of what Trish was saying, connect into what I want and what my pleasure is, but not just like in a short term, like sexuality is, how can my sexuality just like serve my ultimate like actualization and my realization as a human being. So I read a really powerful article called The Uses of the Erotic by Audre Lorde, who's a Black queer feminist who's writing in the 70s. And it's all about how erotic energy as like a revolutionary power, and about how sexuality really as the thing that is upholding so many of the economic relationships that our system is dependent on, just as much as it's dependent on war and oil and like class and like labor oppression. Like it's dependent on creating certain kinds of sexuality and maintaining those relationships, and those are archaic. Like it's weird because it's like there's another article by Gail Rubin, right? How marriage is kind of founded as, it's not found like the idea that love, it's about love and falling in love is very new. That comes from like the 1800s. And that's not until men were starting to move away from moved into cities during the war era and setting up red light districts. And a lot of them were starting to in brothels. So that's what kind of created, at least in the United States, culture around like marriage for love. Before that, there's shotgun weddings. There's the brides are speculated upon by like, the father of the son of a neighboring family, and like, it create lines of property. So
it's to keep the wealth.
Exactly. And to like create alliances. So there's just a lot that can be, there's just so many layers, and it sounds, I think it's easy to think that these things sound like they're old and done, but the way that they manifest, right? I think that we're talking about men being unable to talk about their trauma. I think that the number of men who are unable to, like the fact that infants are still in the United States routinely circumcised, for example, and the idea that there's still a lot of men who will defend their father's decisions without being able to watch a meaningful documentary. And like, I don't know. I know people have their relationships with their sexuality, and people have their relationships with their trauma. And there's people who have medical issues where that kind of like adulthood intervention, for instance, might actually be the thing that like releases that shame. So people, I think, as far as that is concerned, there's also ways that shame is leveraged over our bodies. I think that the idea, at least in my family, of the body as just something that is inviolable, as something that is pure, that is best at its natural state, was also leveraged for shame in a lot of ways. So I think that there's also different circuitous routes that people take. And sometimes that that act of reclamation, that I'm going to reconnect with my soul and who I really need to be. Sometimes it's about abandoning those things, where it's going to be like, I don't need to have that relationship with my body. I inherited that. That's not mine. But sometimes it's like I do. Like that was something that was taken from me. And now I need to face this piece of myself. So I think that there's lots of different ways. I don't think that there's one right way that people are relating to their bodies. And I also think that, there's ways that people cope with the fact that we're only in 2021 and we're not there yet. And that's how I so I think that a lot of these things are a process, and I think that a lot of people have a place in their process. And I'm just always inspired by seeing how differently people act up, and when people chime in and they're relating to these conversations in ways that are different, and when they're adding new perspective, it's just like, oh my gosh, there's just so much richness and so much depth. And when other people chime in about something that never struck me before, inevitably it helps me, like, if I can release them of my judgment, then I release something from myself as well. And it just creates richer experiences in my life and in my relationships and with myself. So I love these conversations. A little bit. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's such a key piece, is that the judgment that we put on another person is often the same judgments that we hold ourselves so tightly to, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a piece of dissolving or chipping away or sanding the de-shaming of your own sexuality. Just if one can compassionately hold another's wants and desires, whether it's the want and desire to be held and loved and just sweetly kissed, or if it's the desire to be, like ravaged, or the desire to be passionately danced with, or like sexuality is so tied to so many things, including food and dance and clothing and
intimacy.
What?
Intimacy.
It's intimacy. So can we as the panel, and can we as people hold that level of intimacy and to really look at another person's wants and desires and their juicy aliveness, their sexuality, and hold it and be like, ooh, that's really interesting that you love that.
I don't think we can until we can do that for ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah. The answer is yeah.
We have to do it for ourselves first.
Yep.
How do we do that? Yeah.
Exactly.
I personally, I've had to excavate all the ways in which I have felt shame, where they've come from. I think for first sort of getting to the source of where the shame is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really loving that place there.
Yeah.
Finding the gentle compassion for the pain that comes with judgment and the pain that comes with shame.
Yeah. And then feeling, getting to a place where I feel worthy of pleasure and love and unconditional acceptance, self-acceptance of my body and my desires. And on that journey, so my journey has included psychedelics and community, and having people around me who are also asking these questions and doing this excavation and this work. And we're sort of helping each other along, and friends and romantic partners. For me, it's been a journey of, de-shamifying is sort of self-acceptance, self-love, self-worth. And once I have more of that, I can give it back to the people around me, including my partners.
Mm-hmm.
I can honestly say for me, it's been deeply rooted in excavating all the judgments I've held against myself, or you know, all the things that have happened in my life. And like, you know, when I was younger, many sexual experiences, you know, that did not serve me in any way, shape, or form, that I felt that I created, you know. And I had, you know, a man take advantage of me when I was literally moving out of my home for the first time, and like he completely got me drunk and took advantage of me. And I held so much shame against myself for that act, and I did nothing wrong, you know. But I always judged myself for being, you know, being vulnerable, being in the place where I allowed that to happen somehow. And it really stifled me internally for a very long time, because I had so much judgment. I held so much judgment around that time period and my choices and poor choice making. And the reality is that I was just literally surviving, like truly, you know, moving out on my own, had very little money, no, you know, nowhere to go really. And so that was a pivotal time in my life. And unfortunately, people do take advantage of people when they see someone in those positions sometimes. And it's so sad that that happens. And it's so sad that men can make those choices. They're not in their right mind, you know. And I just invite women to never think that it's their fault when things like this have happened, that it's not your fault, and that you can let go of the shame that you hold around things that were way out of your control, you know. And it's, we're sometimes a product of our environment, and we don't even realize how much shame we hold around judging ourselves around our environment or the way we were raised or what occurred in our life. And it's really about stripping away all those layers to allow ourselves to experience our authentic self and experience ourselves being a spiritual being, and allowing ourselves to open and flourish in all the ways our soul desires to, and that it's not wrong or bad. So that I feel like the judgment is the core piece, right? Because it's always linked to some experience, right? Evoked the judgments. And it's linked to, you know, familial judgments and like people in your history, right? Teachers, parents, family. And most of the time, these experiences are evoked from inside. So there is a level of like, oh, is this a familial line, right? And how many women in my family history have experienced something like this, right? Because I work with clients all the time, and it's like I get them to like ask certain questions in their dynamic with their mother and their auntie and their, you know, grandmother, and they uncover that, oh my gosh, this is not just me. This level of like low grade anxiety, depression that I carry around my sexuality, not me, I'm speaking of a client, that it was like a light bulb went off for her. It was like, oh my God, I had no idea. And I just kind of like nudged her to go in that direction to kind of inquire about this. Like, it, and so, yes, she always just judged herself that it was only her having this experience, but really it was so much more. There was so much more than meets the eye. And so this is where we just have to kind of have an inquiry and be curious in our family dynamics. Like, is that your story or is that your grandmother's? You know what I mean? And how old is this really? And like, there's a collection of beliefs that go along with it. And it's like a puzzle piece, but then our mind just loops and gets caught in it. Right. And we just want to hide away and keep it secret. Like no one can see it. But then life brings us these people and experiences that just push that button right there, and it evokes it. And then you feel ashamed because you're like, damn it, it's you saw it. You saw my weak spot. You saw my thing that I've been trying to hide all this time, right? And it's just, there is no hiding. God sees all, right? Like we're all a part of God, creation, source, whatever you want to call it, right? This amazing, interwoven, beautiful essence that we're all a part of, loving essence, right? That's my relation with it. And so it's when we can peel away these layers of shame, we get to feel our pleasure, our experience, our loving, and experience ourselves as loving another, right? We can't really fully love someone else unless we fully activate the love inside of ourselves. And we do that by laying down shame. Just make a vow and a commitment to yourself. No matter what, I'm going to go on this journey and I'm going to lay down all the parts of where I've shamed myself.
And part of my journey to de-shamifying has been, I think shame needs silence. And so my journey to de-shamifying has been being more myself in the world and seeing that people still love me, seeing that people still want to hang out with me, that I still belong, even when I'm myself, even when I talk about my fears and my anxieties and my sort of experiences and these things that I used to feel shame about. I bring them into the light. People not only still love me, but they resonate and I feel more connected. That's, community and talking about these things has been a huge part of my process. And one of the things I've done in the last few years is bring groups of like 8 to 12 people together pre-COVID. And we all picked 2 questions we wanted to talk about. And we just sat around talking really honestly about all kinds of things in sex. And people left there feeling light and joyful because we have so much shame around sex, despite seeming like we're this, really sexually forward society. It's a fake kind of sex that we see in our society. And to like really talk about the human experience of sex is like, it's like this huge sort of weight gets lifted because this really important part of our energy and our power and our delight and our joy in life is no longer kept silent and shamed.
I could jump in. I definitely, shame is the key. Shame is building my awareness around the shame. If I don't know why I'm acting out those certain cycles, there's nothing I can possibly do to address them. I think, so family dysfunction was a huge part of it for me. From alcoholism in my household and addictive behavior in my household was a huge part of it for me. My mother reinforcing, I could kind of get out of being in trouble because by fawning. So we have the coping mechanisms. Fawning worked on my mother. So having fawning reinforce, I could just be cute and then she would forget about the bad thing I did and go get me an ice cream. And that's something that has played out in all of my relationships and continues to this day. And I know that about myself now and I don't need to be fake about that part about myself, but also using myself and my own desires as an indicator. I think that there's such a powerful connection between trauma and desire as well, both a sense of reenactment kinds of mindsets I can get myself into, as well as just like really, really harsh, like closed-minded kind of avoidant mindsets as well, where I close myself off. Both of those positions are closed. Both of those aren't actually in communication with my partner unless it's some other level. So I think looking at how myself and my relationships and my desire has been really, really key about what kinds of shame I need to unpack about myself. Why am I getting myself into certain relationships? For example, why did this dumb moment when I realized why I have this soft spot for conservative men. I'm looking for approval from conservative men. Where on earth could that have come from? And like, how has it been so hard for me to admit to myself, because denial is really powerful. I mean, that was just clearly from wanting my father's approval. Having relationships where I'm really just needing different things. There was a time when I really, I was noticing I was trying to get into relationships going through this pattern of, we need to have sexual intimacy and that's how we're going to know that we don't have shame. So let's talk and figure out and make all these things happen and perform for each other so that we like each other enough, and then we'll feel intimate. But having that kind of end point not be the place that you can start a good conversation with. And then switching, kind of becoming aware of that, and then being like, okay, I'm only going to date long distance. This was my experience for a little while. I'm going to actively look, I'm only going to become in intimate relationships with people across the country, which is, of course, another example of shame. But at the time, it was like a perfect thing that I needed to be working on, because now it's like I could be really, really interested in someone and we could just be really passionately into each other. But oh no, there's 3,000 miles and we just have to keep this thing alive. It was a totally different energy than how are we going to make this thing work so that we feel intimate? How are we going to like cope with our distance so that we can keep it as intimate as we feel? So just really looking at myself and just trying to be aware of what I'm doing and what kinds of why I feel like I need the things that I need, and why I feel like I'm afraid of the things that I'm afraid of. And my sexuality just blossoms and gets more safe. It gets more genuine. It feels better. It's more functional, like everything. So awareness is key. Looking at using myself as a thermometer for where I've been and all the fights and struggles and neglect that I've experienced. Yeah. Thank you.
I love the journey that you all de-shamifying your own sexuality. And it really is looking at the places of what you want, what you desire, and also just in being in that place of compassionate, loving acceptance. Why do I do that? Why don't I do that? And why do I hold that bag? Oh, there's just kind of coming back into Dawn's share and Rachel's share as well. And I'm feeling how much we, again, just kind of like hold on to things that other people's beliefs about us. Like, again, my parents were really like, some of them were really open and some of them weren't. And my sexual traumas, like multiple rapes in my life, and how I experienced that. And even the one that really like molded my brain the most was, I was in this Burning Man community. It was like my really close knit family, and I was on this train party, and it was so fun, and my family was there, and I was enjoying it so deeply. And I was wearing the most adorable, I finally felt confident to wear something like that I would never wear in my whole life. Like it was like super tiny, and like it had a bustle. It was adorable. I'd saved up and I'd gotten it really cute. One of a person that I was working with, like I had spent days on his farm. I was like working with this guy, and he came to me and he said something like, "Oh, God, do you have a pair of like dirty panties in your pocket or your hand? Because you just smell like pussy." And I was so deeply crushed for literally years. I was I brought wipes to like all the parties. I brought gum, I brought spray, I brought wash. Like it morphed my brain. Because I just didn't even know. And I couldn't even believe how cruel that was to me. Like I took it on so personally. I went to my friends. I was like, "Do I smell?" And it really, really distorted my reality about what sexuality looked like, because I was so grateful, like for my parents for being so open to actually having that open conversation with me. And then these two sexual experiences, these places where two men raped me, not at the same time, but separate situations in my life, that it took me, like that place right there, I had to look at how I got into those places and why I took it on as being something bad. Like I deserved that. I had to look at those places, right? And the things that helped me most in my life around de-shamifying my own sexuality were, well, of course, sharing with very safe, close confidants, sharing my experiences, like, hey, I don't know why I'm into this thing. And one person would be like, oh my gosh, have you tried Tantra? And they would like share their experiences. And I was like, oh my God, it blew my mind. It gave me an opportunity to see that what I had been told or what I had only learned, there was so much more there. And when I get to share my own experiences with my clients or with my friends, sometimes they're like, wow, that's possible. Like, tell me more. Wait, like what? And you know, just to be like super public, I love to cross dress. I'm totally like a male cross dresser, and I have friends who play and drag a lot, and I love to embody the other side that is also part of me, right? Like it's actually giving myself permission to be true and honor my full honest expression of self, regardless of the definitive like, oh, you're supposed to do that. I don't want to play in that realm anymore. Another thing that's really helped me is, again, I said I was a sex coach, and I went through a school called Sex Coach University with Dr. Patty Britton. And I went, oh man, talk about melting your brain over sex, to like think about sex in a way that looks like it's okay for everyone to have experiences and no longer to make something good, bad, right, wrong, or put it into a box. Like it's all okay, and you gotta like work your brain out. And the thing that we got to do is a SAR, a sexual attitude reassessment, where they kind of bombard you with a bunch of different imagery of things that you might never have seen in your whole life. And the things that I had seen some things at this point, but the things that I saw were lovely and fascinating. And I found myself laughing at some things that I was like, wow, I should probably look into that, because that created like everyone's gasping in the room and I'm cackling because it was just delightful. And then the last thing I really want to bring up about de-shamifying sex is really one of the most powerful and empowering places is to take ownership of what you want and desire in the moment. It could be a chocolate ice cream. I mean, like it's really just starting to take ownership of what you desire just with outside of sex, like training your body to say, hey, Dawn, I really want to have a phone call. Are you open for that? And being able to just own it in a way that's not like, you know, manipulative, like, oh, hey, you know, I'm kind of wondering if, I want to have a phone call with a friend, wink, wink, like asking for a friend, like it's really about the taking ownership and to speak it into existence. And that's something really, really powerful right there, is like, I like this, and I'm wondering if you might want to do it with me.
Direct empowerment.
Yeah, to invite someone into your juicy experience and your nervousness, even to step into the places that are a little like, to be honest and open about it.
And to do that, we have to get over good girl programming, right? And for me, I'm 52. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. Good girls didn't want sex. Good girls looked sexy, had sex for men, but it was, you were a bad girl if you actually wanted it. So deprogramming the good girl, so that we can be honest and straightforward about our desires, is really important. And I will also say the other, so I'm very sensitive to other people. I tend to, in the moment, mirror other people. So if I'm with a partner who doesn't want to talk about sex, is kind of ashamed of it, kind of like doesn't want to like deal, I'm not someone who's going to overcome that and be like, no, I want this. I'm going to end up feeling their discomfort and mirroring it and feeling it myself. I'm going to take that in. So for me, I have to choose partners who are, because I'm totally down for talking about and asking for and all that, but only if my partners are. So I have to be pretty careful and thoughtful in my partner choice, as we all do. but I just know that's something I've realized about myself. I'm like, why in this relationship am I not asking for what I want? Because that's his energy.
It's we lead by example, right?
Mhm.
So if I'm ashamed to talk about it, my person is going to feel that. My people are
And in relationship, like it's right, there isn't necessarily a leader follower. There's two people whose energy is melding, and yeah, so yeah.
Well, it's also matching spiritual curriculum, right? Because like you'll naturally attract the type of person that has the same energetic signature in a way where it's like, all right, if you have a deep issue around something, they're most likely going to have a very similar issue, and you're both going to be able to reflect that and see that in one another and like work out the paradigm together. That's why we're attracted to each other in a certain way, because it's a match. It's matching curriculum. So, because everyone is a reflection of ourself. And that deep intimacy we have with one another, with your partner, right, is an opportunity for you to see an aspect of yourself in them. You've called them forward so that you can see that part and love that part more deeply, understand that part more deeply, come home to it more deeply, have more acceptance there, right? And if there's a block or a place where there's timidness or shyness or discouragement around wanting to share around sexual vulnerability, right, there's an opening. There's where the lean in with the curiosity to explore. I notice that I feel timid here, and own your part, right? It's not about, hey, I notice you. No. It's lean back in to like take ownership of what's yours. Like, gosh, I notice that I do this. And you can kind of speak about yourself as if like observing yourself, observing your patterns, observing what's going on when you're with that person, so that it gives them permission to lean in and go, gosh, you're right. I feel this way too. And then you can have the aha moment together.
I love that. So on this last round, I would love to invite the panelists to just share a little bit about either their work in the world or their last sort of thoughts about what, like just kind of like condensing their thoughts around de-shamifying sex and what personal sexual empowerment might look like. So you can share your work and and I would love to start with Callista. Is that all right?
Absolutely. So what I do, I'm a special education teacher by trade. So I work in the schools with kids with behavioral issues, and the way that I kind of try to overturn some of these patterns. We went through a whole bunch of like gendered scenarios and kind of tried to fit where in a historical framework they might have fit, like in a conceptual framework where they might have fit. So my students are just looking at a lot about how kind of gender dynamics play out right now. They're getting just a lot of health curriculum. So I'm having to write a lot from scratch. There's a lot of old school still. It's getting better, but I think I'm in San Francisco. I don't know how far people are stretching out in this thing, but already in San Francisco, I mean, I've seen other health classes, and it's just what kids are able to communicate now, that in an age-appropriate way compared to what I was able to communicate in high school, is just phenomenal. It's just amazing. So I'm inspired by our next generation with these things.
I love that you're teaching the children. That's one of my. I'm all about that. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Planned Parenthood has a extensive comprehensive sex education curriculum, and there's a couple other places that I can send you to that have comprehensive sex ed for K through 12. You're not going to talk about sex and in kindergarten, but you're going to start talking about consent and boundaries.
That's exactly.
And that's, in the youth up into a certain point. Yeah.
It's amazing. I think, when I was my students' age, I was getting the first iteration after abstinence only. So abstinence only was finally gone, but it was still like sex. There's all this stuff with STDs and abuse, and and then that's your health class, So it's not abstinence only, but be afraid. It's still kind of like that. So the fact that it's getting better. There's a whole variety of learners out there. These things need to be adapted as well for kids who are out accessing these things at different places. And but all those situations that we're talking about, building trust is a big thing that we I want my students in health class to be able to leave with the skills to be able to navigate adult relationships with confidence and authenticity, and be able to trust and be cautious about who they're trusting, be aware of who they're trusting. So that's a bit
have
more
the
than just
discernment to
STD.
know how to trust.
Exactly. It's a lot more than STD curriculum.
Yes. Good work in the world.
You must be a millennial. I got that.
I'm trying. When they're open to it, we'll say. When they're ready for it, I keep the door open and they walk. They enter when they're prepared. So
Consensual conversations about consent.
Okay, I'll dive in. So I am a women's self-love coach. I have coached men before. I'm not saying that I'm not, open to that, but I mostly coach women. And I really stand for the divine feminine rising in all women on the planet right now to really step into their sovereignty so they can live an embodied, holy, sacred life. And that is really rooted in my own journey of, what I've been through, breaking the cycles of abuse, as a child abuse survivor. I had to really break a lot of bad patterns, and I married the love of my life, later in my life, and had a beautiful child. We have a 10-year-old. And so I just firmly believe in helping women really get to the root of what their trauma is. And underneath that is this gem of you that's like your soul essence, your treasure. It's like your gifts are there. It's rooted. It's paired with it. Interestingly enough, right? Because the trauma is covering up what is like the sacred gift you've come in this world. So it's really interesting to lean in and give yourself permission to fully explore it so that you can dissolve it. You don't have to carry it forward. You can dissolve your soul's curriculum that you come here to explore, and give yourself permission to lean into it and love all parts of yourself. It's like a homecoming, coming home to yourself. I'm going to just pull all the parts of me into my heart and love myself as vastly and deeply as I can so that I feel at home authentically in myself. And then your natural inclination of your true natural essence and gifts come forward, and miraculous things in your life start lining up for you. And it's a wild thing, but it's like you start to lean into the soul line, right? Lean in and just love yourself deeply, and your life just becomes grace, living in grace. So my business is called Spark Your Inner Gold, and it's .com. You're welcome to go there and check it out. I have multiple programs. I'm soon to be launching a gorgeous program called Unleash Your Sovereign Queen. And it's really helping women kind of dive deep into the programming of, where they felt rejected, abandoned, not valued. And it's really coming home to the value, the gold within you. And that's it. Claim it for yourself, and lay down the places where you felt that you have not been able to feel fully empowered in yourself. So that's the work I do in the world. And thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Dawn. I love working with Dawn. We are so aligned.
I love working with you too, honey.
Rachel, I know that you're doing a lot of really beautiful work in the world, and please tell us about, again, remind us again.
Yeah.
And,
Say that again.
and your space and all the wonderful things that you're doing in the world.
Yeah, so I have a nonprofit, which is a space in San Francisco called Heart Lab, which really has come out of my own journey, doing all the things and finding the things that have healed me and helped me, and bringing them to community and creating a community space, really the purpose of which is to explore the self and explore connection. As I said earlier, I think it all starts with de-shamifying ourselves, accepting ourselves, and then we become able to do that for others and hold space. And I think we change the world by changing ourselves. So I write, my practice is to write really openly and honestly about sex in my life, and just bring it into the light and de-shamify everything about me, and find out that I can still be a valued, loved human being in the world.
Hey.
So that's what I do. And one thing that I have been thinking about a lot is sex and race, especially in light of Atlanta, but before then, and thinking about as a white woman, how I've been socialized, and how white women get to be the good girls, the mothers, the wives, and so much of the sexual energy of men, like we're supposed to be pristine and good, and then women of color get all the other stuff, and there's this real I don't have great words for it yet, but there's this inequality, and I just, like, women of color get so much shit put on them in sex, and this sort of intersection of race and gender and sex, and I need to acknowledge that, even though I don't have anything to say, but it hurts all of us. The different roles in sex that white women and women of color get, it hurts us all, and women of color die for it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you for acknowledging that. It's powerful.
What an amazing, go ahead, Dawn.
Oh, I was just saying, giving voice to places that we need healing is absolutely how we heal. So thank you for bringing that forward, because you just gave who knows who in our viewership here from this show permission to come forward and allow themselves to explore the healing that's there, right? And it's true, like, we've been blessed to be born in the bodies and the vehicles we're in, but everyone is blessed, no matter what race, color, sex, size, creed, whatever. We're all equal.
Should be.
I just firmly hold in that stance. I firmly do inside of myself, because I don't buy into the construct that it needs to be that way. And I do firmly hear you, because I do believe that we as people are breaking down these things. Like, this is giving voice to it, is saying, this isn't working, and this isn't real, and this isn't the way to relate to one another. This is where we bring back love into the equation. Yeah.
Much love and wisdom on this panel. And just to echo Rachel and Dawn and Callista, is that the work that we're doing is healing within, and really de-shamifying the places in us so that we can step forward and hold space. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for our viewers for joining us. And as you know, Dawn and I run the Self-Love Show on Thursday mornings, and we're constantly, if you're in space that you're interested in working through some things, every week you get a free therapy session with amazing and profound guests from all over the world. And if you're interested in working through some of your own sexual shame and sexual traumas, and interested in, maybe you're a pre-orgasmic woman or a man in a man's body, you're looking to work on some stuff around your erections, call me up. Let's have just a sweet, honest conversation. And let's talk about how we can get you to the sexual empowerment that you want. So I love you all. And I will, one last thing. I really want to promote what Love Coaches Academy is doing tomorrow. And that is Laura is teaching a fantastic class on, it's called world building. Sorry, I'm not as prepared as I thought I was just now. And you can find that link. I'm going to put the link into the chat. I'll find you. And if you have questions, go ahead and type it in around her class. It's going to be really powerful on how to identify your wants and needs. So if you're still struggling how to find, really speak to that, that's a good place to start. And that's not necessarily a sexual conversation. And I know that she's a great teacher. So thank you all so much. And I'll see you next Friday.
Thank you, Trish.
Bye.
Thank you, Trish. Nice to meet you both.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Dawn. Thank you for inviting me